Hello and welcome to Console Cowboys. So today we're going to talk about everything having to do with pin code readers and how to bypass those and how to deal with them when they come up in our physical penetration test. So if that's something you're interested, then stick around. If not, I've saved you time by not clickbaiting you, so hit the like button and I'll catch you in the next video. So let's talk about readers. Now, this is going to be physical, social, and electronic attacks against pin code access control. Now, the thing you got to pay attention with these are how they're being utilized. So this comes down to your recon. When you're in an environment, maybe you've already broken in, or maybe you're sitting out in the parking lot and you're watching one of these readers, you want to pay attention to how people are using them. Is somebody walking up and just typing in a pin code and then getting into the building and not actually swiping a badge? Or are they walking up swiping a badge, but they never type in a PIN code? Or are they swiping a badge and then putting in a PIN code? Because that's the way you also have to utilize it when you're attacking it and you're not bypassing the door altogether. So those are the first things to think about. And the way that comes up is with your recon phase. You want to situate yourself in the environment where you can actually watch these and pay attention to how they're being utilized. And that's part of your exploratory phase before you break in. Because with physical penetration tests, I know a lot of people don't think about it this way, but like 50 to 80% of your time is going to be spent in the recon phase, the watching phase, the online remote recon phase, embedded recon before you even try to break in. So all of these things are going to tell you how to break into the facility. So there's another thing you got to think about too is there another MFA component along with it, right? Is there some kind of biometric feature associated with this that you didn't see during your recon until you get really close? That's something else to think about. And how many different locations are these readers on? Is this on multiple places around the facility? And are they being utilized in the same way in each location, right? One location might need a badge and a PIN code. Another part of the location might just need a PIN code, etc. So pay attention to all these things and spend a lot of time in the recon phase. Now, we'll go through some attacks, things that are less likely, but things to think about, as well as things that are more likely and things that are going to work almost every time. So let's start out with some less likely phases of this, and that would be, default or common codes, things like 0000, 1234, or something like 911 pound for emergency people. These things might be worth trying. More than likely, they're not going to work, but you never know. So something to think about. Or specific reader weaknesses. So if you walk up to a facility or you're looking at it online in Google Maps and it's some weird looking reader you haven't seen before, take a picture of it, throw it into like a Google image search, find out what type of reader it is, and see if there's a random bypass, because there may very well be something where you lift up the reader, short something out, and it just lets you right in without a card. So these are things to think about. Now, the next attack we're going to talk about is going to be your noisy, kind of messy type of situation. So there are attacks against these utilizing things like putting powder on them that works with a like black light type of thing, and then be able to see what happened on this reader. So I'm going to demonstrate that. But the thing about this is that it's kind of messy, right? So it's not something that I would say should be your go-to, but it is an option. It's something that you can play with. So I think there's already powder on this thing. If there is, I don't want to put more because it gets kind of messy. Yeah, there is. So you'll see that if I put it on this reader on the keys here, that it gets quite messy. You can see the powder all over it. However, will a user even notice that? Or will a user even care? Now, they'll probably notice it because it's kind of apparent, but they might just think someone was playing around with jelly donuts with powder all over it for all they know. So they're probably not going to question it. So here's the thing. If I was to walk up, maybe I'm an emergency person and I'm pressing pound 911. And then you'll see that some of these keys, it might be hard to see in the video, look a little bit more like they're worn out. And that's what we're looking for in this attack. So if I shine the light on them, let me get this up to the camera a little better. You might be able to see it. You might see the difference there already, but also when you shine the light, you'll see that that pound key looks a little more used than the other one next to it, along with the 9. And I'm doing this backwards, by the way, based on the way the camera is. So a little bit of effort here, but you'll see the difference in these buttons. So that is the attack. Now, what is the problem with this attack? Well, if each user is using a different pin code, then you're going to have to pay attention to that reader and watch it. And after a user goes up, you're going to have to look at what they pressed. Now, if this pin code situation only requires a pin code, that's cool. Now you have a way in. But if it also requires a badge and it's per user, then you're running into an issue. So you might have collected a badge, but then you don't have the pin code. You didn't actually physically see that person go in because maybe you got this at Starbucks with a long range reader. So that's an issue and something to think about, but it is a good attack. Maybe in the parking lot, you saw someone coming up, you tag them with a long range reader, then you watch them walk up. You've already pre-gamed this right here, and then you grab the pin code. So it can work. It is messy. You're definitely going to want to walk up after and then wipe it all down with a wet rag really quick, so it just kind of looks clean, like nothing ever happened. But it is a valid attack. It just gets messy. And when you initially put powder on this thing, let me tell you, it looks pure white. So you kind of want to blow off some of the powder off of it and have it in a little bit less of a clean, or messy state of just putting it into this powder container right here. So that's one attack, and it's valid, but it's not the best option. Now, we also have guessing attacks. So let's say we grabbed a read of a badge from somebody, or we found a badge and we have that badge now. Well, we could also guess passwords. We could guess, if it's something the user chose, which probably isn't, but it might be, guess 1, 2, 3, 4, guess something that, if you know where the badge came, their birth date, guess common things that it might be. It's going to be really, really noisy and not that likely probably to succeed, but it is an option if they're not logging those and if those are not throwing alerts. So those are things to think about as well. You might be sitting under a camera that's watching you, and then every time you type something in, it might be throwing some kind of alert to the SOC. Hey, failed read, failed pin code, failed pin code, failed pin code. Does anybody ever come out to do that? Well, it's probably something you should check anyway. So see if somebody shows up, but you don't want to get burned in the beginning of your engagement. Might be something to try later on. So what else is there? Well, we have logging and recording. So we have long-range attacks. Now, this would be during your surveillance phase. If you can set yourself up across the street or in a car in the parking lot where you have an angle to that reader and the person's body is not blocking it, you might very well be able to tag them in the parking lot, grab a read on a card, or if you have a card and they're reusing pin codes, so you already have the first part, and then you can videotape with a lens. Like here's one for a cell phone. Not the best in the world. It's a little sketchy, but it will work. It'll give you, I think, like 18 or 25 gain, something like that. So it might work for you, but you'd probably be better off with an actual legitimate camera and a telephoto lens if you can set that up, get the right angle to it, and get it on tape, and then review it and try to figure out what they typed in. And that's probably a better option than trying to figure out, okay, what pin code out of this combination of 9, 1, and pound is correct, and do I already have a badge read? Because then you can kind of not rely on the powder on a one-time thing. You can rely on, I got this person's badge read, I'm going to stalk them and be really creepy, and then watch them type in the pin code. So it's a little better. Then we have attacks that are better than that, right? So we have MFA stealth readers. So this is not a real reader. This is similar to the other one I was doing attacks with that involves some social engineering signs, and it will log and capture pin codes as well as badge reads for you, and you just place it on the wall next to the legitimate reader and put a little social engineering sign like we talked about in other videos and I've been using in real life. And that's a fantastic option. As well as we have ESP keys. And an ESP key would be similar to this concept where you are capturing the reads as they're scanning them on the door and getting pin codes and everything else. But you're just capturing the data that's being sent to the controller from this reader. And you're doing that with something that you install inside of here. Now, I don't have one of those on me today. I think it's in my other house. I'm not 100% sure. But there are some things to think about with this as well. So first off, when you walk up to the reader on the wall, you're going to have to take it off the wall and then mess around with the wires. So that's something to think about, something you're going to want to train beforehand and make sure you know how to do this correctly. Second, the bit on the bottom of this, a lot of people think to themselves, oh, well, I have a security bit on the bottom of that, so it's protected. And the security bit, if you look really close, is going to be two little dots instead of like a Phillips head or a flathead screwdriver. But the problem is you could just buy a bit set like this. I got this from Red Team Tools, and it has a bunch of security bits. And what you're going to use is this Spanner 6 right here, which has these two little dots on it. And actually, if you buy an MFA stealth reader, like I have right here, that comes with one of these as well. So that just fits right into here with a regular screwdriver. So you can grab one of these, pop it like on a normal bit, pop it into here, and you can walk right up to the wall, unscrew this guy, and then get in there. Now, once you get in there, you have to worry about wires. So let me unscrew this one, which I also have a security bit on, just to show you kind of the wiring situation in there. This is my trainer, but it's similarly set up. So I can kind of show you, and I'm also going to show you something else in here as well. So first off, if you look at the back of this reader, you'll notice that there's a label on here. And the label actually says data 1, data 2, ground, your VC, DC, power. So those are the ones that you actually need to plug into. And if you look in this reader too, you'll actually see similar. Right here, there is the same thing. It lists out which wire is which based on where they're plugged into onto here, right? So I would know, generally, a lot of the time it's going to be this white and green wire, and then probably the red potentially for power and the black for ground if they did it normally. And those are the ones that you're going to tie into. But if they did change around the colors in there and they still have the label, you could just look at the label and know which one to tap into, which is fantastic. Now I could show you this too. Here's the powder stuff here if you want to grab that and kind of looking how messy it is. I put that picture up there. But also, here's the diagram in the ESP tool, right? It's literally lined up for you where it's like data 1 white, data 0 green, black, and right here, it's hard to see, but it says WGBR, and those are the colors, red, black, green, white, so you know what to grab. And it tells you which order to put them in. So put in the data 1 first, then the data 0, then the ground, and then do the power last after everything else is set up so bad things don't happen. So the documentation, that's mostly what you need. And there's a tiny little tool. It's like a little piece of plastic. Have one laying around here somewhere with these little things popping out. And basically you just punch the top of this key thing down with it, with the wire on top of it. You just punch it, just splices the wire a little bit and makes the connection to each of the things on the board, and you're good to go. Now, once you do that, you have the ability to look at what data is coming in and directly replay it to the controller, as well as do denial of service on the controller so that nobody else can get in. But you can also walk back and you just connect to it with your phone. Your phone has Wi-Fi, just like the demos on this one. It'll have like a little web page, and I believe it probably shows it right in here too as well. So you have a little web page, and it'll say facility code, user number, your bit stream, so you can configure your own card with it if you do some conversions to binary, etc. And then it has buttons where you can just, send it over there. You can replay all of these and just open up the door and not even worry about the pin code, and that should work for you. I'm going to do a demo on this one in a second. I will just shut down the stream, pause, and then restart and do that. But also, other things to think about with this is that if you open up this reader too, inside of it, there may be other slots used for the other biometric stuff. and you might be able to just disconnect a wire and it doesn't use that other biometric stuff. So if you take a look under there and you know what you're looking at, because you're used to electronics and you're a lot better at me than electronics, you could potentially turn off other biometric things depending on what's going on in there. So that's other things to think about to bypass things. But let's pause really quick and I'll hop right back. I'm going to set up this thing really quick and we'll show the web page and how the data comes into this one a little differently than it comes into the normal Stealth reader so that you can utilize it. So 1 second here. All right, we are back. I have a card here. I also have turned on this reader right here, and we have the web page open. Now on the web page, it's the same doppelganger web page where we have our card number, facility code, and our bit length. So if I scan a card and then I type in, actually, let's just look at it with just the card first. So I'm going to refresh here, reload. And we see bit length 26, facility code 42, and then 168180. Now, if I type in, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we do a reload, we also have the pin right under it, right? So card, pound 911. It's just recording everything that I put in here. So I just wanted to show you the difference between this card reader's output and my old Stealth reader. You're going to see basically one after another. So if you have this on the wall and all you're seeing is card numbers, these people aren't inserting pin numbers. If all you're seeing is pin numbers, these people are not scanning cards. And if you're seeing one after the other, pin card, pin card, pin card, it should be pretty easy to figure out which pin code goes to which card. And that's how you utilize this for an attack. So definitely pretty cool and one of the best options. So if we hop back into my notes really quick here. So those are the three main attacks I would say you should use. And the best ones probably being ESP keys hooked inside this reader to the wires or using this Stealth reader on the outside to grab all of the data. The difference is with the ESP key, you're grabbing the data from this to the controller. When you're using this, it's a multi-factor or a multi-class reader that's grabbing data from any card it supports as you go up to it. And that's another thing to think about. You can walk up to these readers and then just try a whole bunch of cards and see what one it beeps on if they're using a multi-reader and figure out what types of technologies that they're using. So that's another thing to think about. But when we compare these two methods, which I consider the two best methods, there's trade-offs. This one, it's something that doesn't belong in the environment. So putting that sign up there with a little bit of social engineering of, hey, I'm training new readers for the environment. Please swipe your badge on each one will go a long way in making this one work. And then you can create a card with it and walk in and use the pin code, right? So that's the first thing. Then on the ESP key to think about is it's pretty reliable. They're not going to know it's there. All you need is that 1 minute window to pop it off the wall and install it, walk away, and it works the same as this, except that this you have more options to kind of push codes over through to the controller or just deny other people access, and you can choose who you want to use. So you can kind of watch the facility, and if you see people coming in odd, weird hours that would be security guards, you might have a higher code that will get you into other places within the facility. So that could be good as well. Higher access, something that works off hours. Another thing to think about. The only negative to this, and the reason I don't use the ESP key in the regular reader, is that it will leave marks on the wires. It will leave bare spots on the wires that the client has to fix. So what I would say is, if you plan on using this attack, prior to using it in your statement of work, and your rules of engagement, your ROE, I would state specifically whether you're allowed to use this attack or not and what the implications are that they will have to rewire it when they're done. It will probably continue working just fine without an issue, but it degrades its lifetime and they should get somebody to come in and rewire it after the test. Just so that you're covered, because you don't want a client to get really mad, and you want to specifically state these things. Now, this particular reader, this bypasses all of that, but again, you're adding a foreign element to the environment that looks a little different, and questions might pop up. Whereas putting the ESP key inside of this, nothing seems different, nothing seems wrong, as well as you have a little bit more power with the ESP key installed because you're talking to the controller. So unless they're using like OSD or whatever it's called, where they are encrypting it between the reader and the controller, you should be able to get all of that data and do stuff with it, right? But you could stop that attack with that, but nobody actually implements that. So it probably will work. I believe it'll work with some of the cards that this one may not work with. So these are all just things to think about when you're thinking about what attack to do and in what environment. Now, the next thing is social engineering. So we were talking about brute forcing earlier. We can leverage that in our social engineering. So if you see a group of people coming up to the reader in the morning, it's a high traffic time, you could walk up to that reader with a legitimate badge that you had got, but you don't know a PIN code to it. Swipe it, it turns green. You type in your PIN code, you start looking a little frustrated, you do it a couple more times in front of them, and you're like, man, this always happens to me. I don't know what's going on. It won't accept my PIN code. And then just that person might scan their badge, boom, boom, hold the door for you and just let you in. So that's like kind of like a little more ballsy social engineering. You are directly relating with the person. But again, it's a very simple attack and it's reasonable. And when you're doing social engineering, as long as you say something reasonable, it'll generally work most of the time. And then, of course, make sure you're dressed the part and everything is on par. You don't want anything to look off, but that should work. And then the other thing is you could try to swipe it a few times, punch in a code, and maybe they don't hold the door for you. They don't go, oh, let me get it for you. Sorry, sweetie. I have this problem too. Without any of that, but they just see you visually doing it. And then they open the door and they walk in. You could tailgate right behind them. They probably won't say anything because you were swiping a legitimate badge or a seemingly legitimate badge, and you typed in the wrong code and you're still standing there. So you're not a criminal. What adversary stands there after trying to break in, right? So they likely won't say anything. So you could turn it into kind of like a warm tailgate where it's like they know you're tailgating, but they don't question you versus like, I'm just going to skirt behind this person. So there's ways to use social engineering with these, even when you don't have a PIN code or necessarily even a working badge. So think about that as an attack against these readers. Now, some other considerations, like we were talking about, is it actually using a PIN? Does each user have a different PIN? Because if you're watching and you're doing this attack and only these 3 buttons are ever worn out, then also you might walk up to a reader where the buttons are not above the buttons, but they're on the buttons. And you might see certain buttons are worn out, and that'll give you an indication where, like, if you look at it, oh, it's using like 19 or 20 and then some 2 other digits. That might be a year. Or I remember I worked at a facility one time that had a non-electronic, but it was just like a push button type situation. And they were just using, it was either the area code or the zip code, right? So trying those things in the area you're in, if it corresponds to the numbers that are worn out, or even just trying them anyway, is a good way to do with it. And then what else do we have here? We have, think about, can I just bypass the 2FA on the reader, right? If it's using a PIN code and then biometrics, and I pop this open, we talked about it, you might be able to just short something or pull a wire so it's no longer sending that data to the reader, the controller from the reader. It might not even utilize it. You're just going to bypass that altogether. So that's something to think about. And then, of course, can I just bypass the door? Do I even need to deal with these codes at all? You might be able to just walk up, shim the door, or use a double door tool, or go into the door, whatever it is, and never even have to deal with these. And that's fantastic as well. Of course, check for alarms around the door, etc. We could talk about that. So you're not setting off alarms, but you might not have to deal with them at all, which is fantastic. And then, what happens, of course, too, like on multiple failed pins, or if I pull this off the wall, do guards come out? So those are things to think about. Am I going to alert security in some way in the way that I chose to mess with this, right? If I'm putting powder on here, or I'm using a fake reader or ESP key, Most of those things shouldn't trigger anything unless there's some kind of testing on this when it gets pulled off the wall, which can happen like a very small percentage of the time. Most people aren't using that, but it's something that can happen. So think about all those things. And I put down some of these potential issues here, like number one, denial of service. If I incorrectly put on that ESP key and I mess up some wires, am I denying real people to the building? Could be an issue. And then damages, right? Damaging the wires. We talked about that. So that's a consideration. And then alerts, right? So if I take the reader off the wall, does someone show up to see what's happening because it alerted that was pulled off the wall and there's some kind of tamper switch? Something to test later on, especially if you're doing an audit. And then are the cameras above watching you do this and are they monitoring them? Now, in my experience, they are not getting alerts from the reader off the wall probably, and they are not getting alerts from the cameras and or even watching those cameras unless you are doing something really sketchy for a long period of time or a window gets broken and they check the camera. So you're probably okay. And then failed code alerts. So are you typing in tons of pin codes and is beeping like crazy up in the SOC? Maybe, maybe not. Something to think about. But again, it's not your first jump to attack either. So it's something further down the line as you're getting louder because you can't get in, you're trying other things. Tamper features, as we talked about, it might pull this off. It might be light sensitive. It might be some kind of magnet that gets released and you might be able to bypass that with another magnet. Something like that might be happening. And then if you have high traffic issues with the powder or the tampering of different things, like if you're under there installing an ESP key and someone legitimately has to get into the facility, you need to be able to do that quick, get it done, come up with a pretext really quick. Oh yeah, we're just updating these readers, etc. Fixing them, you should be good to go. Swipe here. Oh, and by the way, do you want to swipe this one too? We're training new readers because this one keeps getting faulty. Whatever your social engineering is for that, right? So these are all the things to think about and the stuff I wanted to bring to your attention today. So hopefully this is useful to really get your brain flowing and figuring out ways to attack these things. If you like the video, like and subscribe below and follow me on Twitter. I got a lot more stuff coming out, but I haven't really seen a video like this before, so I decided to make it. So have a good one and check you later.